Great, I've hit the live button, so hopefully on Facebook, people are able to see us. We'll just give it 1 second to make sure it has picked up there. And hello, I see a lot of our volunteers in the Zoom.
Nicole, I'll also film.
We should be okay as long as it's going. Yeah, actually, why don't you record?
Okay.
How it goes.
Sounds good.
I would like you guys to record in case I want some bits for teaching purposes.
Perfect.
Okay. Sounds good.
Awesome. So it looks like we are live on Facebook.
Good. All right, and it is 1 o'clock now, so we'll get started. It's actually 1:01. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us at our Beaty at Home session today. And today we're very lucky to have Ildiko Szabo telling us all about albatrosses. So before I hand it over to Ildiko, I'm going to just do a little bit of housekeeping and just give you a bit of an introduction to the museum. So I'll just start by telling you all the faces you'll see and voices you'll hear. So of course we've got Ildiko. You'll hear from her in a couple minutes. And then my name is Kashfa, and you will also hear from Nicole,
Hello.
Hi, Nicole, who will be answering your questions over at Facebook, or bringing your questions from Facebook over to Zoom. I wanted to just spend a minute to do a land acknowledgement and let you know that the Beaty Biodiversity Museum is on the traditional, unceded, and ancestral land of the Musqueam people. And I've included a link to the First Peoples map of BC, so you can see which territory you live on, if you live outside of the Musqueam territory. And here we are. This is the Beaty Museum here at UBC. We are open now, so we're open Tuesdays to Sundays, 10 to 5. So I hope you will come visit. But we are also close to other museums on campus, the Museum of Anthropology, the Botanical Garden. They're open currently. Also the Pacific Museum of Earth, which is currently not open, but it is our neighbor. And here's what the museum looks like on the outside. So you can see the huge blue whale skeleton that we have. It is the biggest thing at the museum, but it is just one of over 2 million specimens at the museum. So lots to see. Right next to the museum is the Biodiversity Research Center, which you can see here. And there are over 50 researchers in this building, and they're studying all aspects of biodiversity. And some of the organisms they study are represented in this poster. So you can see a seahorse, you can see different types of birds, mushrooms, sunflowers. And this shows the different collections in the museum. So we have 6 collections in total. We have fish and fossils, insects, marine invertebrates, and the herbarium, which is plants and fungi and everything related. And then on the top left, you can see the Cohen tetrapod collection, and that is where Ildiko works out of. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ildiko, and she will tell us all about albatrosses. So I'll stop sharing, and there we go. All right, Ildiko, over to you.
Hello, everyone. And I realize what a beautiful sunny day it is today to be outside. But wouldn't it be wonderful if we could be aboard a ship out in the middle of the Great Blue Ocean and be looking at all the wonderful members of the albatross group? I will at some point make mistakes and call it the albatross family. It's actually the albatross order of birds, the Procelliformes, and then within that, there are several families. Now I'm going to switch, do screen share and get to a PowerPoint and share that. And I'm starting off with this slide. And the take-home message I'd like everyone to absorb today is that albatrosses are not gulls. And this is actually a really important part of my presentation because there's so much convergent evolution between various members of the albatross family and sorry, I'm using the word family, not in the taxonomic sense, but in kind of the friendly sense, but in between the albatross family and the gull family of birds in terms of different members due to the same requirements for food and for shelter, having very similar lifestyles and morphology. I'm learning how to use my computer and it's not letting me advance the slide. Okay, here we go. So in terms of the albatross's closest relatives, their closest relatives are penguins and loons. And then there's also storks and there's a darter here, cormorants. And they are not as closely related, but their closest cousins are basically the pelicans, the penguins and the loons. Whereas the terratiforms are more closely related to cranes and rails. So totally different evolutionary pathways for these birds. Now we've known about albatrosses for a long time. And of course, we've known about them way before handwriting was invented, but I'm starting with European history. This is the very first taxonomic plate, the very first scientific drawing of an albatross. And notice it was from 1749. And right from the get-go, people noticed that it is the beak of the albatross that you need to look at. So here's a joke, it's all in the nose. And what happens is in birds, the nostril is actually called the nares, but in birds, the nostril, typically in most birds, it's actually an open structure and you can see right through it. But in albatrosses, there is a tube that is made out of the same material as the rest of the beak. And it's called a naricorn. And this is how the birds excrete salt. Albatrosses, when they're thirsty, they don't go to a lake and have a drink. They basically have to get the water from the fish and the squid they eat. And regardless of the type of albatross, it's always the same. It comes out of sorry, that's a typo there. That's another name for the story of the structure, but it should say naricorns. The other thing to note in pelicans is that they have in albatrosses, pelicans have it too, is this very pronounced nail with a big hook at the end. Here's a drawing showing where the nasal salt glands are. So this is where the salt is withdrawn from the blood and then it basically seeps out of the naricorns. So classic facts. The largest albatross, I'm sure quite a few of you are aware, is the wandering albatross. And it is truly a large bird at 11 kilos. The smallest one is the least storm petrel and it's 20 grams. So we basically have a huge span of sizes in this group. Altogether, we're talking about 147 species, of which only 21, sometimes 22, it depends on whose taxonomy, are the classic albatrosses. People like to know whether or not males and females are the same size. In a lot of birds, the female is bigger, but in albatrosses, the male is bigger. And the smallest of the two albatrosses has a wingspan of just under 2 meters. That's the yellow-nosed. And the largest, the wandering albatross, is at 3.5 meters. So that's significantly bigger. Now, albatross refers to a group, but it doesn't mean it's the biggest, it includes the biggest members of the family. The petrels are very diverse in size, and notice that giant petrels are bigger than the smaller members of the albatross family. You get the same kind of parallel in hawks, in a group that's known as the short-toed eagle is smaller than our red-tailed hawks, but nonetheless it's known as an eagle. So names often don't actually directly confer size. Here's something else I'd like you to think about, the differences between gulls and albatrosses. Gulls, when you go to the beach, they help themselves, they'll eat your French fries, they'll eat anything you offer them. They're true omnivores, whereas all members of the albatross group are obligate carnivores. They will not eat your French fries. What in the heck's going on in this one? One of the things that makes albatrosses different from all other groups of birds is what they do in their gut. And they store food in their gut, and they store it as oil. And this has been technical term for it is stomach oil. And they use this oil for all sorts of things. The most logical one is they forage out at sea, they digest their food, they leave their stomach full of this stomach oil, and then they come back to land and they feed their chicks. So a variation on kind of like a milk storage. Quite a few birds do this, and they all the groups do it differently. Flamingos produce a substance that has a lot of fat, which is termed milk. And so do the larger penguins, kings and emperors, and so do, what's the other group I'm looking for? Pigeons. So with these stomach oils, the albatrosses, and this is a northern fulmar, a species that is quite easy to see off the coast of British Columbia. Another use they have for it is they actually will do a projectile vomit. And the reason this is so dangerous is that for any seabird, if you get oil on your feathers, you get hypothermia and you die. This particular display is at Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, and I think it's very, very well done. So here are some wonderful names that we call the different members of the albatross family. And I have in front of me, and this is all going to make you all slightly dizzy, I've got, because I forgot to say that I'm actually in the tetrapod section at the museum. I'm going to step up on this bench, but I've got on this table a wide, oh, I am not screen sharing. I'll show you guys all that later, because that's not going to work. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. I have all the specimens in the following video in front of me, and I'll use them for answering the questions. But what I have been working on this morning is, and I forgot to roll it back, let me just share this screen and get this video back to the beginning, is that it's currently July 2020, and we're getting ready for basically our first COVID fall semester, and I'm preparing materials for teaching virtual labs. So this is a very rough first cut of a video for the Biology 427 class. It's also going to be used by the University of Northern BC, the 308 class, and possibly for some of the first year courses. So I'm going to just let this video run. And because it's very hard for me to grab all the birds and manipulate them properly in front of the screen here as part of this Beaty at home. So here goes, and forgive all the mistakes in this video. I have been making it madly over the last couple of days. My name is Ildiko, and I'm the collections curator of the Cohen Tetrapod collection here at the University of British Columbia. Today I'm going to talk about the albatross group of birds known as the Proceliformes. This order of birds is truly fascinating, and the bulk of this presentation was made specifically for the UBC 427 class and the University of Northern BC 308 class. So I have assembled here a table full of the albatross family, its iconic members and its less known members. So I'm going to walk over to the table and we're going to start looking at the birds. Here at the Beaty Biodiversity Museum, we've got approximately 318 different specimens in the albatross order of birds, Proceliformes. Now, we don't have any of the truly huge ones. We have none of the royal albatrosses or wandering albatrosses. But what I'm going to concentrate on is the albatrosses that will be on your lab quizzes and part of your curriculum. And that means the ones that can be seen off the coast coast of British Columbia. I'd like you to look now at the beaks of gulls and albatrosses at the same time. So we'll start with the albatross, the group we're trying to learn. And when we look at the beak, we can see that it's made up of different plates. Now, this is true of every bird, but in most birds, they're fused, like we see here in the gull. So this particular plate at the end of a bird's bill is known as the nail, and in albatrosses, it's particularly curved. Now, there happens to be a string which is left over from preparing this bird in the gull's nostril. But one thing I can show you by moving this string is that the nostril, actually, you can see right through it. I put my finger there, I took it away, but yeah, there's light through it, and there's no structure inside. Albatrosses are known as tubenoses, and when we focus in on that, there is a bony tube that comes out of the nose. And this tube is very important because it is how albatrosses eliminate salt. They live totally at sea. They can never drink salt water. They get all the water they need from eating fish and squid, and they have to get rid of the excess salt. Now, there's some other differences between these two birds that may not strike you right away, but it's important to note that I'm pausing the video here and moving it forward a bit because I've already covered this section. So pardon my moving of the cursor, and then we'll start roughly here. Thank you. It's on your study list. This is a black-footed albatross. Notice that the beak has the same plates. You've got the pronounced nail at the end of the beak with the hook, and you also have the tubes or the narcorns coming out of the beak. This bird is generally speaking all dark. It'll be easy to recognize because of its size, and yes, it does have black feet. Now, in a museum specimen, black feet can also mean that the bird has a lot of oil in the skin and in the bones. So an awful lot of birds' feet turn black. What we're looking at right now is the difference in wing shape between a black-footed albatross and a glaucous-winged gull. As I mentioned, the albatrosses we're looking at today are smaller ones. So if you're expecting something that was 3 times as long, that would happen if it was wandering albatross. And what we're looking at here is from the elbow joint to the tip of the fingers. What I want to draw your attention to is that the albatross wing is quite narrow compared to the gull wing. The second species in the albatross group that you need to learn for 427 is the northern fulmar. There's 2 of them. It's the same species. It comes in a light morph and a dark morph. Now we're going to zero in on the beaks to see what has happened. And there is a slight difference from what we were looking at previously. We can still see, and I'll center in on the dark morph here, we can still see that there is a pronounced nail and there are lots of plates on the beak of the northern fulmar. What I want you to notice is that the naricorn, or the salt tube, has moved. Instead of coming out the side of the beak, it's now coming out on top. If I rotate it, it'll become more and more obvious. This is a leech's storm petrel. It's part of a wonderful group of birds, sometimes called sea butterflies, and watching them as they hover above the ocean, picking out zooplankton, is truly delightful. They're quite small, and I want you to notice that on this bird, it's got a white rump and a gray stripe on the wing. And when you look at the spread wing, the stripe is much more obvious. When we look at the beak, we notice that it's the same as the northern fulmars, in that the naricorns have migrated and fused and are on the top of the beak. Now, there's another bird that has a very similar name. It's called the least storm petrel, and it's the smallest member of the albatross group. I'm going to add a bird, which is a violet green swallow. And the reason I've put it here is to just give you an idea of scale. The storm petrels are very, very small birds. And remember that the key thing is to look at the beak. Here are the 3 birds you need to learn for the 427 class. At the top is a black-footed albatross. In the middle is a northern fulmar. Remember that it comes in a light and dark morph. And at the bottom is a leech's storm petrel. Always remember with all the albatross family to have a good look at the beaks. Find that structure, which has given them the common name of tubenoses, and you should have no problems on your quiz identifying these birds. I started this video talking about gulls and albatrosses and how they are not the same. There's a lot of convergent evolution between the terrariformes and the procelliformes. This is another example. The bird at the bottom of the screen, the diving petrel, is an albatross, and it has the same kind of tube nose for excreting salt. And when I roll over this, which is a relative of the gull, this is an auklet, you'll notice that it's very, very, very similar, and they have very similar lifestyles. Both of these birds spend a lot of time underwater. They chase their food underwater, and they both breed in burrows. And they both can fly very well, but it's not half as well as they can swim. Now, some of the other names that are in the albatross family, which are quite intriguing, is a group called the shearwaters. And a lot of birds in the albatross family have been named by people that were getting the birds of the northern and the southern hemispheres confused. So if I look at the shearwaters tag, we'll notice that it's called puffinus. So there was a confusion with puffins. Shearwaters, like puffins, nest in burrows, and they dart about, and they're excellent fish eaters. So these were at one time believed to be related to puffins. Now next door, I've got some petrels, and these are looking a little bit gull-like to our eyes because they've got the same coloring as gulls. But again, we've got the beak morphology that clearly tells us that it's a member of the albatross group. And these particular ones can be seen quite easily if you go to Hawaii. And I thought I would end with this particular petrel, which is Cook's petrel. And this one died in a most unusual place. It died in Lillooet. And for those of you that don't know your geography of British Columbia, from Vancouver, it's about a 2-hour drive to Whistler. And from Whistler, going further inland towards the desert part of British Columbia, it's another 2 hours to Lillooet. And that's where this bird was found. And the reason it was there was because of a profound storm event, and it lost its way. Okay, I think I'm back on. That video isn't supposed to end there. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to attach the ending of the video, which will be an invitation and a reminder to students that they can get into the museum for free. So it'll end with the UBC logo, et cetera, for the museum. So now I'm going to go back to share screen.
Ildiko, is it okay if we take a minute for some questions?
Sure, and then
okay.
I'm going back to the PowerPoint. Okay, great.
So we've had a few comments. Nicole was asking a question about the large albatrosses. So is the museum planning to, or looking to expand the collection? And do we have space in the cabinets for large birds?
I would make space for a wandering albatross. Don't ask me where, but I would find room. The truth of the matter is that obtaining a wandering albatross or a northern or southern royal would be quite difficult. And the best way for us to get to do so would be for me to become aware of somewhere in the world where there's one in the freezer and go to that museum and prepare it. The amount of work that it takes to prepare an albatross is such that no one is likely to do one for you. It would probably take me a week, and it's a lot of hard work because albatrosses are so fat. They have a lot of oil, not on, basically a blubber kind of layer, and they're just a very difficult bird to prepare. And need I say that I'd probably want to throw out all my clothes because I would have fish oil. You know, every night would be a major cleansing ceremony to try and get the fish oil from you. So yes, I'd love to have a royal albatross, and I would love to be able to prepare one.
Awesome. Ildiko, that actually ties in really well to a question from Gordon on Facebook. He asks a two-part question, firstly about mating rituals of albatrosses, but the second part is, when handling the specimens, should you wear gloves to prevent finger oils from getting onto them?
I would say that with the albatrosses, wearing gloves would be a good idea to contain the oil that is in each bird. Some of our specimens are actually very, very nice, and those are birds that were actually sick and they died of starvation, which means they don't have oil. But I would say that quite a few of these albatrosses, even if I touch them for about 2 seconds, I have a mad urge to wash my hands because I get grease all over myself, at which point the finger oil from my hand is a non-issue.
Sounds good. That's it for questions. That's it for questions for now. I just did want to acknowledge, I think Sunny has said that the storm petrel was very small. So that was very interesting and cool to see the comparison with the swallow.
And the picture that I've got share screen on right now, and this is a storm petrel. And it's not clear whether or not they dangle their legs the same way that when they're flying, the same way that a turkey vulture does. It's just because they can't be bothered to hold them up. It's less energy just to let them dangle. Or whether or not they actually are attracting food by making, you know, disturbances on the water. But this is, you can see where the analogy comes from, that they look like little butterflies. They're really very, very charming. So if there isn't another question, I'll move on. And
yeah, sounds good.
Okay, let's figure out how, am I sharing my computer? Can you see the picture of the petrel?
Yes.
Good, okay. For some reason, I'll try, okay. So in the albatross group, there's two strategies. The birds that are in red, the surface nesting, this strategy is be big. And if you're big, you can have a lifestyle where you're basically you sleep at night and you're diurnal, you're up during the day. All these birds can walk on land. All of them are surface feeders. And if you want to walk on land, that means that you're not going to be very good at swimming underwater at speed. And remember that fish are not, are very good at swimming fast. And then there's the other strategy, which is the very small to medium. Some of them are bigger than others, and they're nocturnal nesters. Being able to walk is variable. And most of these, and not all, some of these are like puffins and auks. And I forgot to mention that puffins are related to auks. They're all related to gulls. They're the ones that can swim fantastically underwater. So the albatrosses are doing these duo strategies. There was a question from Gordon I didn't answer. In terms of the mating rituals, on land, albatrosses kind of sway. And that has to do with the center of gravity of the bird and how they move and they're clumsy. And those movements have become exaggerated and are part of the courtship. And they do have a dance of sorts. Next slide. Sorry, I have to remember. Oh, I was actually going, that's out of order. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Doldrums and the horse latitudes. These are very, very important to understand where albatrosses live and where they don't live. So basically the Doldrums are areas on our planet where there is virtually no wind. And this comes up in a lot of literature, and it's also in the most famous poem about albatrosses, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, where the ship was becalmed. So the reason I'm bringing up the Doldrums is to explain this map. The density of red is proportional. The more, the brighter red, there are greater numbers of members of the of albatrosses. And when I say albatrosses here, I'm talking about petrels and everything, fulmars. And this is where the greatest concentrations are. There is an exception to what I just said, in that there are lots of fulmars here in the North Atlantic. So I misspoke. This is more to do with true albatrosses. So we notice that there are none in the North Atlantic, and we notice there's none at the equator. The Doldrums separate these zones, and there are a few individuals of several species that have managed to get across the Doldrums, and then of course they can't go home. So there are exceptions to everything. Oops, problem with my slide. Now we do have evidence that the black-footed albatross, the dark one that I showed, used to live in the North Atlantic. There are fossils of a colony that was located on an island near Bermuda. So moving on, we've done wonderful satellite tracking of all sorts of different kinds of albatrosses. I can't remember the species. I think it was a yellow nose. They put a tracker on it, and it took it 46 days to go all around basically the southern portion of the globe. Our North Pacific albatrosses are great wanderers as well. Now, here's the fun part. I mentioned that sailors have fun naming birds. The albatrosses we have in the North Pacific, the three of them, the black-footed, the laysan, this is a laysan, and the short-tailed, are known as goonie birds, which I think is quite delightful. And they are quite goonish. The most famous albatrosses in the world, one was actually a royal albatross, a really huge one. That was Grandma. She disappeared, by the way, when she was 62. And we have no idea whether she disappeared, that she died of natural causes, whether she was long-lined, but she did not come back to the lighthouse where she had been breeding. Now, the close to home on Laysan Island, which is part of the Hawaiian group of islands, is where Wisdom lives. Wisdom is currently 69, and she has been very well studied. I should rephrase that. She's at least 69. She was an adult when she was banded, but they thought that she was a young adult. Young albatrosses actually practice for a couple of seasons dancing and basically are like teenagers getting to know each other before they settle down to mate. Now, one thing, we know a lot about Grandma and Wisdom. Grandma had 5 husbands, 3 of which she outlived, and 1 of which that she married twice. I couldn't find the gossip on Wisdom. I know that she's had many husbands. Her current one, sorry, I'm not going to pronounce his name, and yes, they're doing exactly what you think they're doing, but she's only been mated with, or shall we say married to her current husband since 2010. So, we do have a record of how many chicks she's produced, And I'm afraid I've forgotten that number, but we're talking at over 30. I thought I'd switch. This is a wandering albatross. I have been lucky enough to have seen a lot of these. I've also been lucky enough to have all 3 royal albatrosses in my binoculars at the same time, meaning another southern, a northern, and a wandering. And I took a 10-day trip to South Georgia, which is on the other side of the Antarctic convergence, and but it's not part of Antarctica, but it is an Antarctica island. It was absolutely a marvelous experience. And I thought I'd share with you my favorite albatross and my favorite place in the world to go see albatrosses, and maybe actually my favorite place in the world, period. This is part of Falkland Islands. This is Steeple Jason. And in this colony of black-browed albatrosses, there are, I think there's 200,000 pairs. I may have my numbers slightly wrong there. I do have one, which I'll pick up in a minute. Now, these particular albatrosses have a nickname, the ones in this genus, the same way that ours in the North Pacific are goonie birds. These ones are known as mollywogs, which is a lovely word. Now, these ones, I want you to notice that they're surrounded by mud, and they make a wonderful nest, which is very much like a flamingo pot. But this is a mud nest they create. And yes, they're very happy to nest with Marconi penguins. So they are great fun. I thought I'd also share the albatross species that I like the least. These are giant petrels, which means they're the same size as Laysan albatrosses, getting to be about the size of a black-footed. And here it looks like a normal kind of bird. It's just come in on the waves. But look at that wonderful, crazy behavior with its tail. It's trying to look bigger. It's trying to look like a turkey. And here we are surrounded by, okay, this is on South Georgia itself. And those are southern elephant seals, which are truly large. We're talking about 4,000 tons for this male that's right here. So these birds are carnivores, but they're not necessarily fish eaters. So they like to strut around and look very strange. So he's strutting up the beach, trying to look big. He's dancing some more. And now he is strutting and basically trying to scare away the other giant petrels and the skuas. And the reason he's doing this, and I must say the next slide, if you don't like blood, I'd recommend shutting your eyes. What these guys do is they actually eat the stillborn seals, and they are vultures. So I realize it's a bit of a gruesome ending, but albatrosses cover the gamut. They're these wonderful little butterflies. They are these huge, white, majestic birds. They are noisy. They're wonderful. And then they have this one outlier, the giant petrels, which are totally fiendish. So I'm going to end my presentation there, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ildiko. That was really wonderful. There's a question from Nicole. She's asking, do they have different partners in the same breeding season, or are they sequentially monogamous?
They form what we call long-term bonds. And what that means is that they have one partner for the breeding season. Studies looking at basically the DNA of the chicks has shown that usually the parents that are looking after the bird are actually the real parents, which doesn't happen in all birds. And I think if you said they were serially monogamous, that would be a good term. The other thing that seems to be clear, and this happens with the bald eagles in our neighborhood as well, is they're not inclined to ask each other their age. So sometimes an albatross will, for a second mate, will pick someone that is either much older or much younger. And that results in a turnover of mates.
Cool. I had a question of my own. I wanted to know how we tell like ages of albatrosses. Like, how do we know?
Okay, albatrosses, okay, with looking at plumage and molt on wings allows you to age either an Andean condor for the first 7 years, and then you just don't know.
Okay.
And with albatrosses, I think we can age them for the first 5 years. But one study that was done by Pyle, and Pyle is the author of the Bander's Bible, is that he looked at a lot of basically long line bycatch albatross wings that were prepared. And he found out that they don't have a consistent molt strategy. So the answer is we're not sure.
Okay. Cool. If anyone has questions or anything they'd like to share, feel free to type it here in the Zoom chat. If you're on Facebook, you can comment over there. There's a question. Did you say that they were or were not fulmars in the North Atlantic?
There are petrels. I misspoke there. So thank you for that question. In the North Atlantic, you are going to get shearwaters, you're going to get storm petrels, you're going to get most of the members of the albatross family. You are not going to get albatross. In other words, there are, and if there was a species in the North Atlantic, this is the Blackfooted Albatross. We know it used to live there because we found the birds, we found the bones, we found nesting sites, but we have no other evidence of any other species of albatross breeding in the North Atlantic. And whether an unlucky, basically, tidal wave wiped out the last colony there, or something else happened to the other colonies, we really don't know. The other group of albatrosses you will not get in the North Atlantic is the one that is the hardest one to see, and that is the diving petrel. They're also confined to the Southern Hemisphere. But in terms of all the other groups of other types of albatrosses, they're all in the North Atlantic. So thanks for clarifying that.
Awesome. We do have a couple more minutes. We don't really have any questions. So Ildiko, I wanted to throw it to you if there's any specimens you'd like to show us, or any cabinets or anything.
Well, I've got them here, and I've got a crazy albatross I'll show you. Got a pink head. Okay, so we know a fair amount about this particular Laysan albatross. She was banded in Hawaii, and then for reasons that are not recorded in our database, Whidbey Island in Washington State, she was caught, and they decided to apply pink. Now, this is not unusual. There was a time when they were studying the gulls at the dump in Victoria, at the Heartland dump, and they caught a whole bunch of gulls, and they did basically one in every color. The color that's applied is always some kind of, some brand of children's paint, so it's non-toxic. And the reason for coloring them is to find out whether or not the albatross that everyone is seeing, whether it's the same one or whether it's never seen again. This particular one, we have on the tag that it died in Port Kells. And I'm sorry, I'm forgetting where Port Kells is. I've been there. Does anyone can shout out what city it's part of? Port Kells part of Surrey, or is it part of Richmond?
Looks like it's part of Surrey.
Okay, it's part of Surrey. Okay, and it's out towards Zero Avenue, I think. So basically, I just think it's kind of fun that we have one pink-headed albatross. There's precedents for that. Ross's gulls, which are teratiform, they have pink heads in the breeding season.
Cool.
But in this case, this is man-made convergence, evolution, not natural.
Very cool. So we are at 1:45, and so I wanted to just remind everybody, if you have any last questions you can ask. And Ildiko, if there's any last specimens you'd like to show us, or any?
I think I'll go back to the PowerPoint and just do some humor and some popular culture. So this is back to share. Okay, and I'll go back to the PowerPoint. One thing that is talked about is the prevalence of ocean plastics. And this is quite dire when it comes to albatrosses and a lot of other birds. And this is the remains of a chick. And the parents are seeing the plastic floating in the ocean and mistaking it for food. And it ends up in the guts of the chick. So we do have a lot of attention at the moment on microplastics. That's also huge. That would affect the storm petrels, who would be busy thinking that that little white thing is either a fish egg or something like that. But that ocean plastics are a huge problem for these birds. And I'm going to go on to the next slide. There are many, many different illustrations that go with the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. And a lot of people associate this bird very, very strongly with that particular poem. And if you've got a sense of humor, I recommend Monty Python and the Flying Circus and their albatross skit. It's also not rated PG in that it uses a few swear words. Now, in terms of something else that I've got here on the table, I was going to segue to something else, but I'll leave it there.
Sounds good. All right. So if I just want to check with Nicole if there are any last questions on Facebook or any last.
No last questions, but we had a good turnout on Facebook. So thanks for joining us, and some good likes and hearts as well. So fabulous. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So I think we'll wrap it there. Thank you so much, Ildiko, for telling us so much about albatrosses and showing us those amazing specimens. I definitely learned a lot. I just want to mention one last thing before we wrap up our Beaty at Home. We do this every Wednesday at 1 p.m. And so next week, we're actually going to learn about BC shellfish with Sheila Byers, who's an interpreter here at the museum. So I hope that you'll join us. With that, we'll wrap up. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and hope you have a good rest of the day.